board. We'll get started here. I anticipate we'll have some more people signing on as we get going here, but the majority of the first several slides is recap of what we've discussed in previous webinars, as well as the actions we've been taking as a group to develop the modifications of the Unified State Plan. Most of you should be familiar with the webinar room now. On the left-hand side of the webinar screen, you'll see the chat pod. Please utilize this to make any comments or ask any questions during the webinar. We will open up the telephone lines at the end of the presentation, but if you have anything you want us to consider as we're moving along through this webinar, please put those in the chat pod. The webinar PowerPoint is actually available in the Files To pod in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Also, if you're having trouble hearing the discussion through your computer speakers, you can call into the 866 number that's listed in the chat pod and listen that way. However, I would caution you against putting your telephones on hold. Please put them on mute, as many times if you put them on hold, it puts a background music or other voice or music type things out there for us, and it becomes hard to listen once we do open up the telephone line. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn this over to Christy Jones, who's joined us today from Kerber, and Breckles. She's been leading the charge of the work group developing all these modifications, and have her start the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So our agenda for today is we are going to look at the modified operational elements. As you'll recall, last time we went over the strategic elements. We'll run through a timeline that leads up to submission of the Unified State Plan. Just a reminder, you've seen this slide before, but I want to reiterate that this process was led by the Workforce Innovation Board, and underneath that there was a Unified State Plan work group, the work group consisting of the IWIB, core and required partners, and there were also input from stakeholder committees and subgroups. And starting next week, and I'll talk about it in more detail later on in the presentation, there will be a public comment period. And for reference, you've seen this slide before, but this breaks down the Unified State Plan submission and who was responsible for each section of the content modification. So in webinar number 2, we went over the strategic elements. We're going to do that same process today with the operational elements. And just a reminder that there's also program-specific requirements. So there's a Title 1B plan, there's a Title II plan, Title III, and Title IV plans. Those will all be a part of the package that goes out for public comment. So you will have the chance to look at those title-specific plans. I'm not going to read these, but I just wanted to make sure you had in one area all of the operational elements to the Unified State Plan. It really breaks down to 3 main headings. That's state strategy implementation, state operating systems and policies, and then coordination with state plan programs. We're going to start with state strategy implementation. There's quite a few subheadings for this section, and it takes up a large chunk of the operational elements. So first we have the state board functions. In the new modification, we reference the IWIB strategic plan, and that also includes the 5 objectives of the board. And then we talk about the committees, task forces, and work groups. In this section, it's more of an overview or an explanation of the committees, task forces, and work groups. The actual breakdown of the committees, task forces, and work groups, the way the ICR is structured, they fall under board activities, or the board activities section, and Mark is going to lead us through that later in the presentation. One thing I forgot to mention is that when we are in state strategy implementation, all the strategies and supporting activities that we laid the groundwork for in the strategic side are carried over to the operational side. So if you're actually in the document, you'll see the strategies, the activities supporting those, just as you would in the strategic elements, but you'll see much further descriptions and examples of how that implementation is taking place throughout the operational elements of the plan. The next part of state strategy implementation is core program activities to implement the state strategy. There is a large amount of content on the Evaluation and Accountability Committee and their identification of continuous improvement opportunities following a review of the common WIOA measures for the core partners. One or two examples are the 2017 Talent Flow Analysis Pilot Project and Workforce Innovation Fund Impact Evaluation. And there's discussion on new evaluation and research opportunities, business demand-driven orientation through sector strategy framework. There's reference to ICCB's Workforce Education Plan and the Adult Education Strategic Plan. The definition of career pathways is discussed. The Workforce Readiness through Apprenticeships and Pathways Committee is explained. And then there's regional data in this section. You will have seen these data sets before. They were previously in the strategic elements, but the work group saw value in also including them here to answer the questions raised by the ICR or the guidance that DOL and the Department of Education put out. So as you can see, this is a large list, and this is just some of the items that are discussed under core program activities to implement the state strategy. So this is a very big component of the operational elements. Under state strategy implementation, there's also alignment with activities outside the plan. There's discussion of the Illinois Task Force on Employment and Economic Opportunity for Persons with Disabilities, and the 2017 plan link is included. There's also talk of the Illinois being an employment first state and recommendation to align the mandated requirements under WIOA with the employment first principles. Coordination, alignment, and provision of services to individuals is the next section. The service integration policy work group is discussed. The details talk about the work group creating a framework to address needs, such as the integration of services of all core partners to job seekers and expanding collaboration efforts on metrics to improve service delivery. The one-step certification policy work group, there's at least a paragraph on that in this section, and this is new since the initial submission because this was not in place when we submitted the plan in 2016. Same with the governor's guidelines. They were mentioned in the 2016 initial submission, but since the issuance of final rule came out after the initial submission of the plan, there's been updates to the governor's guidelines. So those updates are explained in the narrative, and then the governor's guidelines will be an attachment to the plan. For coordination, alignment, and provision of services to employers, the Integrated Business Services Framework is mentioned, and there's info directly from the report on the degree of coordination that varies between partners. And then support employer-driven regional sector initiatives. So some of the examples are the Workforce Innovation Fund Round 1, or ADAM, the Unified Business Services Analysis, and Talent Pipeline Management. And the narrative discusses how all three of those inform the development of the Integrated Business Services Implementation Plans. We're still in the section state strategy implementation, but there's a shift to an educational focus. So the next section is partner engagement with educational institutions, and there is language on the Illinois Community College Board's Workforce Education Strategic Plan. The narrative talks about job-driven education and the training system, and then system improvements that address workforce development needs informed by labor market information. And the P20 Council is discussed here as well. Partner engagement with other education and training providers. This is a section that has lots of new content because there's quite a bit that's happened since the 2016 submission. So there's the Every Student Succeeds Act state plan, the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, career outcomes for Illinois high school seniors, and some of that information talks about that specific program, so how the Illinois Department of Employment Security, State Board of Education, Illinois State University, and the Student Assistance Commission all work together, and in the first of two phases to identify intergenerational mobility pathways for high school seniors. So it's a nice example of the coordination between different partners in the state of Illinois. And then the National Governors Association Work-Based Learning Policy Academy is discussed. Leveraging resources to increase educational access. The Illinois Apprenticeship Plus program is talked about. Funds focused on providing opportunities to the targeted populations outlined in the Unified State Plan. And then improving access to post-secondary credentials. Lots of new information here as well, such as the ESSA College and Career Readiness, talking about equity in terms of access to education. Competency-based high school graduation requirements pilot program. The Common Career Pathway Program Information Initiative. Early college credit. I thought everyone would be interested to know there's a statistic listed in this section stating that 55,000 unduplicated students participated in the program, and you can read more about that and other statistics in the Improving Access to Post-Secondary Credentials section. Higher Education Commission on the Future of the Workforce, the Credentialing Initiative, and then Improving Access to Registered Apprenticeships. One of the areas or examples that's discussed is the IWP and the Apprenticeship Committee hosted an event in 2017 at Parkland Community College, and there were over 100 people and 18 community colleges represented. And if you were at the WIOA State Summit, this event was actually promoted there. Okay, this is the last part of state strategy implementation, coordinating with economic development strategies. So the Illinois Integrated Business Services Framework, which was discussed previously, is included. And then career pathways for economic advancement. The narrative talks about partnerships with education systems and expanding career pathway opportunities through accelerated programs and work-based training, while aligning and integrating programs of study that lead to industry-recognized credentials. Okay, now we make the shift to state operating systems and policies. It is a little confusing if you're reading the plan because they talk about operating systems and then it switches over to policies and then it really goes back into state operating systems again. And the reason that we follow that format is because we're required to, as the ICR is laid out that way. So the operating system, there's an overview of the Department of Innovation and Technology, or DOIT. And if you remember, the plan was submitted in 2016. Well, DOIT was not established formally through executive order until January of 2016. so much has happened since then. When we started this modification process, the work group reached out to do it, and they submitted content, and we've had calls and discussions with them as well to make sure that they had a voice in the modification. The narrative talks about the subject matter expert interagency team that did an analysis of all the data systems that the core partners house. And their recommendation was to create an interface connecting these existing systems. So the actual narrative gives an overview of all of the systems currently in use. So you'll see the name of the system and a few sentences to multiple paragraphs about each system. The EMOU is also mentioned, and 22 agencies have signed on to the EMOU through DoIT. And then finally, I wanted to mention there's a section on other systems. So an example of an other system would be the high school equivalency system, which is where the Illinois Community College Board maintains a database of records at the state and local level of individuals who take the approved high school equivalency examinations. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Burgess because, as I said, we start with the state operating systems, but then there's a transition to policies.
Thanks, Christy. I just want to remind everyone that as we made these modifications as a group, we had to keep in mind three different main goals of discussion. The first being we want to capture what has occurred in the last 2 years since the original submission of the Unified State Plan in 2016, especially if some of those are continuing on. So we want to highlight what things are occurring now. Those activities, policies, and that are in the process now. And we also want to capture anything that's planned for the next 2 years as we lead to the end of this Unified State Plan 4-year period and start thinking about our new Unified Plan that we'll be due in 2020. So all three of those are being thought of, and that's why when you look at the Unified Plan, much of the information that was included in 2016 remains there because it's still valid, and then we're adding to that with those other two categories of what's occurring now and what do we expect to occur based on plans and other expected activities over the next 2 years. So in the policy section, it especially talks to this because you'll see some policies that were existing in 2016 that we included in the Unified Plan, but also we have some new policies that have either been revised or are new since 2016, especially noting that all of the policies that are put in place by the state board are now housed in our e-policy system. So you can find those there on Illinois WorkNet. If you go to the main page of Illinois WorkNet, there's a policy, WIOA policy button there that you can click on, and then you can find all of these policies. Some of those to highlight include the minimum training expenditure. Those from the board and those from the other stakeholders are aware that the state board has approved a couple different revisions to this policy, the first being to combine the adult and dislocated worker formulas into one formula. Following that, at their recent meeting in September of 2017, they increased the minimum training expenditure rate of 40% to 50%, and they're still having discussions now to finalize policy revisions on how we're going to actually calculate the formula, what is going to be considered direct training, and also what should be considered for a hold harmless clause that they've discussed, as well as any sanctions or any kind of awards that are necessary for those that do or fail to meet that minimum training expenditure. Also, we've had some minimal changes to the eligible training provider and training program policy. We are going to be discussing in the next several months to a year the new demand occupation training list that's associated with that policy. We issued in 2017 a one-stop center certification policy, as well as a one-stop operator procurement policy that once the Department of Labor saw requested some changes, so there's been some revisions to that. And also we brought to the e-policy system the methods of administration that talks about non-discrimination and equal opportunity provisions under WIOA. so we've included those as its own chapter. As we continue on into this section, we include organizational charts. Those are required of each of the state agencies to highlight, management structure and on down the line of to the employee first line, frontline staff. And we've also are going to include a functional organization chart for the state board. We're still getting some final revisions to that, but it'll show all of the state board members and everyone really in the system, the high-level players, if you will, in the game that is workforce here in Illinois, from all of the required and core partners to all of the committees, task forces, and work groups of the board, and then all of the resources that are being utilized by all of those entities to ensure the workforce system is working efficiently and effectively. Then we highlight each of the 4 core programs and some of the key activities that they've had ongoing for the last couple of years and maybe still ongoing going forward in the next 2 years. For the Department of Commerce, which is Title I, they've issued Talent Pipeline Program. They've issued grants for those. They've also issued Youth Career Pathways grants, and they've focused on that population. We'll also talk about youth in another area of their committees, task force, and work groups here in a minute. The Community College Board, which is Title II, discusses adults who are parents, so they're talking about some of the populations they serve, including assisting immigrants and others who are English language learners. Moving on to Title III, which is at the Department of Employment Security, or the Wagner-Pizer Act, the funds that support those employment programs. They talk to the reemployment services and eligibility assessment. I think they also have an area that they speak to their veterans program, and they also talk to participation in local and regional workforce integrated business engagement planning meetings. And I want to highlight that because actually anything discussing integrated business engagement, there's really a core partner work group working on that integrated business services team. It includes state board members and some other stakeholders. So it's really a very key activity going on right now in Illinois to focus on the business needs and ensure that the state is addressing them appropriately. And finally, Title IV, or the Department of Human Services Division of Rehabilitation Services, discusses updating statistics on their community partners. We kind of shift back to the board again here in the next section, and as Christy mentioned, it kind of bounces around a little bit in the ICR, but we're required to follow their platform, even though sometimes it doesn't seem to make sense as to why it bounces back and forth. And what it does is also create repetition in some of the information because it asks very similar questions. And so what we try to do in our work groups is kind of really look into the question itself and see how we can answer it. While it might be similar in nature, answer it differently to address the actual focus of the particular question in each section. So when we get to the state board section and the activities that are going with the state board, we talk about the membership roster. We have to have a submittal of the roster for the unified plan, and if it's not a compliant board, there's risk that the Departments of Labor and Education will not approve our unified plan. So we're working to finalize that roster, working with the governor's office to get some additional appointments to ensure that we are in compliance when we submit this according to the timeline that Christy's going to talk about here later on. Some of the activities that the board has ongoing are through its structure of standing committees, task forces, and work groups. Here we highlight the 5 standing committees that exist today. You'll note 2 of those are a little bit different than what you might recall from earlier discussions. And that's the Career Pathways for Targeted Populations Committee, which actually is a kind of a revision of what's currently the Youth Standing Committee. They are discussing kind of changing their focus from only a youth committee to all targeted populations and ensuring those discussions are tied to career pathways to ensure we get these populations careers and not just a job that may only last a short period of time. The second one there listed is the Information Technology Committee. This came out of the work of one of the goal teams under the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board Strategic Plan. where the Data and Technology Goal Team identified a need to have continuing discussions related to systems and data collection and reporting. And so they are preparing to ask that the State Board approve an ongoing standing committee for information technology that will continue to assist the board, assist other partners in creating dashboards to gather and collect information and make it available to the state and local partners. Also working towards integrated systems is required as one of their functions under the WIOA Act. And so we feel that their proposal, the Executive Committee, I should say, feels their proposal is a very strong one. So we anticipate that although they aren't meeting until March 15th, which is the day we have to submit this plan, we anticipate that that's going to be something that will be passed without much discussion, or if there is discussion, without any hesitation to approve it. So we're going to go ahead and include that in the discussion of this section. And then the other three committees have been ongoing. The Evaluation and Accountability Committee, or the EAC, really has a huge part in a lot of assessments, evaluations, and a lot of work that's going to come of the Unified State Plan. So looking forward to what they have going on in the future. Moving on to Task Force Structures. Actually, there's two listed here, but each of them have completed their main focus and objectives during the past 2 years. The strategic planning efforts led to a final IWIB or Workforce Board strategic plan that was finalized and issued. It was approved in December and finalized in format late January or early February and submitted to the public. The other one, the Transportation, Distribution, and Logistics Task Force, completed their work and submitted a report back in September of 2017. But they're kind of breaking off into a small little work group to just track some of the recommendations they made in their final report. So I thought it important that we have to highlight the work that they've done in the past, and we might have more information to include later on as we complete the next 2 years as well. And then finally, we have work groups assigned from the IWIB that address this Unified State Plan. We have several State Workforce Board members that have been working alongside all of our agency partners and other stakeholders to create and develop these modifications, review them, and get to where we are today and hopefully where we'll be in the next week and a half and prepare for submission. And they also are involved in developing the annual workforce development report that's required under WIOA. The other work groups are all related to different policies. We have a service integration policy work group that is discussing how the integration of all of the services and all of the partners is going to occur. As I mentioned before, the minimum training expenditure work group has kind of a third level of discussions they're undergoing now to finalize policy related to some of the elements in that definition and formula of the expenditure rate. And then finally, the One-Stop Center certification policy was issued last year, and now the work group will be undergoing some revisions to that. And for those that are aware, that only included comprehensive centers the first time around back in 2017. We will have to update that to include all affiliate and specialized centers as well, which brings us to a point of needing a new work group that's going to meet for the first time next week to define what is an affiliate or a specialized center. So many of our partners are part of that discussion, board members, local board members are a part of these work groups. So it's a very diverse group included in these to ensure the consultation that's occurring on behalf of the board as they develop these policies is dynamic and includes everyone's interests as they make final decisions and put those into formal policy. As I mentioned, the Evaluation and Accountability Committee has a real huge part in what the Unified State Plan has outlaid for them, as well as what the board strategic plan has as far as different objectives and priority activities. And so they are developing, they've met a couple of times, and they're going to continue to meet and develop their focus, what it is they want to do in the next year to 2 years, and have some long-term goals for maybe some additional performance measures that they'd like to see Illinois address beyond just the common measures that WIOA requires of each of the core partners. They'll be exploring dashboards, as I mentioned, in conjunction with that technology standing committee to share the data that they find important to their work and ensure that both at the state level and the local level, boards and the members of those boards have available to them the information they need to make educated and informed decisions. Other assessments and evaluations, we can tie in some of the other policies I've mentioned. Certification, we've got some results from the initial round of certifications of all of the comprehensive centers in the 22 local workforce areas. So we'll combine that into a couple of statements to indicate what the results were from the certification, and also include some of the current status of the minimum training expenditure rates for each of those 22 local areas and the boards that oversee them. We will look at other assessments that have been occurring. We've highlighted those, and also look at the evaluation measures that are occurring not only from the state board but also from all of our partners to ensure that we are capturing all of the various ways that the system is evaluating itself, identifying best practices and sharing those amongst themselves so that everyone can get better. What the board has identified is that even if you're meeting a particular goal, a particular performance measure, there's nothing wrong in trying to achieve even higher standards. And so we want to make sure we're sharing what we're finding in these evaluations, in these assessments with everybody so that we can all learn from each other and try and improve Illinois' overall workforce system. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Christy to finalize the next several slides. And then we'll open it up for discussion in the telephone lines once she's complete. Christy?
Thanks, Mark. So distribution of funds for core program. This is very program specific. It's basically the only time within the Unified State Plan that it is program specific. There are very few updates because the partners reviewed this section. And there just were not very many changes from the initial submission. In regard to program data, data sharing agreements are discussed, and they, as you know, facilitate cross-program access to data about common participants while minimizing duplicative systems costs. The Illinois Longitudinal Data System is discussed. The Workforce Data Quality Initiative is discussed and explained, and then the Centralized Demographic Dataset Administrator. All of these kind of tie together as a master client index number for all clients. And then I wanted to note that 6 agencies have completed data sharing agreements and have begun to submit to the CDDA, and that 6 will soon transition to 7. But some statistics for you, 69.7 million records have been processed, and 14.2 million unique individuals have been identified through this process. Okay, we're still under state operating systems, and the ICR has a question as to explain how the state board will assist the governor in aligning technology and data systems across one-step partner programs. And I know Mark discussed it in detail, so there's more information about how the IWIB EAC is involved in this process. The Information Technology Committee is discussed here. The Illinois Department of Innovation and Technology, or DOIT, and their role is explained. And then WIOA Technical Assessment. As I mentioned, DOIT, they've conducted 2 phases of an independent WIOA technical assessment of the core partners' applications supporting the WIOA programs. And the overarching goal of the technical assessment is for the state CIO, in consultation with the core partners, to provide a comprehensive solution to implement a technically integrated WIOA system in Illinois. Assessment of participants' post-program success. As I mentioned in 2 slides ago, the Illinois Longitudinal Data System and the Illinois Workforce Data Quality Initiative are also explained here. There's a section that's very specific to UI wage record data and the performance indicators of effectiveness in serving employers, retention with the same employer, and employer penetration rate are all explained here. Privacy safeguards, asking the state to explain how privacy rights are guarded. Two examples, the Illinois Community College Board talks about the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, and then the Department of Employment Security talks about the Labor Exchange Program. It doesn't necessarily make the most sense, but we're still under state operating systems and policies, and it's the ICR asks for priority of service for veterans. And one of the things that was added is information about the Jobs for Veterans State Grant Plan and how that plan is in direct alignment with the Unified State Plan. There's updated statistics from the 2016 submission, and then there's also a detailed process of the services that are provided to a veteran when visiting a comprehensive one-stop center. The next two sections are addressing the accessibility of the one-stop delivery system for individuals with disabilities, and then addressing the accessibility of the one-stop delivery system for individuals who are English language learners. So there's lots of new content here. Discussion on Illinois being an employment-first state, the addition of the Office of Equal Opportunity Monitoring and Compliance within the Department of Commerce, and then Illinois WorkNet and how the portal consolidates resources for job seekers, but that it can be translated to Spanish language content. And finally, there's discussion on meaningful access to all, to aid, benefits, services, and training. The final section of the operational elements is coordination with state plan programs. So there's discussion of the cross-program groups created by the IWIB, the Unified State Plan team, the team members who came together to write this plan, the WIOA State Summit that took place in 2017, business engagement, and then employer-driven regional sector initiatives. It's kind of interesting to know, and this is actually discussed in the plan, that when the original WIOA plan was submitted, few of the currently existing cross-program groups actually existed. But now, in our modification, the plan is full of well-established cross-program groups that were created by the IWIB. And going back to the employer-driven regional sector initiatives, at the summit, one of the regional partnerships actually shared the successes and lessons learned from their experiences. So that's the last section of the operational elements. Just a reminder, I know you've seen this slide before on plan submission instructions. So the state is required to enter all of this content into an online portal that's hosted by the Departments of Labor and Education. Our text that was provided for the initial submission is still there, and we're able to edit or delete it. DOL will issue guidance on performance measures in the negotiation process. In a forthcoming guidance document, I wanted to let you know we have received that documentation, and we've gone back in and made some updates to the plan based on that technical guidance. The 2-year modification deadline was originally March 15th, and then the departments of Labor and Education have 90 days to get back to a state to make a decision. I wanted to let everyone know that just before this call, we learned that the Department of Labor notified all the states that the Unified State Plan submission deadline has been extended to April 2nd. We had a timeline laid out from the beginning that led us to submission on March 15th. So we will most likely stick to the March 15th deadline. It is our understanding that the extension was primarily for states that were impacted by natural disasters. So sticking with the March 15th timeline, on March 2nd, the draft will be reviewed for compliance, consistency, and accuracy, so something that we are working on right now. The final draft will be completed and sent to the IWIB on March 5th, and so March 5th through the 9th all of next week. The plan will be available through the Illinois WorkNet and all of the core partners websites that it is out for public comment, and there is a website that you can go to and submit comments. On the 13th, we'll have a call to review all of the public comments. The 14th, the final plan will be considered complete because that's when we'll need to upload all information to the federal portal. And then the plan is to submit content on March 15th. Just a reminder that the next Unified State Plan, so a full rewrite is due in, or the anticipated due date is March 3rd of 2020. Planning for 2020 to 2024, because Unified State Plans have a four-year shelf life, will begin immediately after the 2018 modification is submitted. And as always, if you have any questions, on the screen is my contact information and the contact information for Mark Burgess. Mark, did you have anything else to add?
No, I haven't seen any comments in the chat, so I don't know if anyone has any comments they want to make over the telephone lines, but if the WorkNet staff can open those up real quick. The one thing
Your
I do want to
microphone
say
has been turned
is we
on.
appreciate all of your involvement in these webinars, and if you were a part of any of these teams developing these modifications, we appreciate your input. It's been a very time-consuming, really fast-paced process, but it's necessary and something that Illinois, I think, is putting together in a very good fashion, and I think will meet all of the requirements of the ICR that the Departments of Labor and Education have required of us to submit. For those that are board members, because the due date and submission date is March 15th, we will be bringing this up to the board at their board meeting on March 15th, but unfortunately we will not be able to take it up for formal comment and review or approval because the occurrence of submission will have already occurred. So really it's more of a formality on March 15th. So utilize the next few days, especially during the public commenting period, to make any final recommendations or comments that you might have, because once the public comment period is over, really there's no other opportunity for public or even the board members to make any other comments. Again, we appreciate all of your input during this process and look forward to any final recommendations that might occur. With that, we appreciate your involvement today, and if anyone could not join today, if you know of anyone that couldn't join today, if you want to contact Christy or me, we actually have recorded all of these sessions. If someone wants to go back and review them after the fact, we can give them a link to that. We're not going to make that public because we don't see that many people thinking they're going to want to review that, but if you do know of someone that wants to see or hear the discussions today, please direct them to Christy or me for the link to that recording. Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.